The woman ahead of her in line didn't even look back when she said it. Some people really shouldn't be allowed in places like this. She said it just loud enough. That particular volume women like her had perfected. Loud enough to land, quiet enough to deny. Iris Calloway. No, wait. That name's in the file. Let me begin properly. Nora Vance had been on her feet for 11 hours. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she'd spent the last 40 minutes of those 11 hours sitting on a plastic chair in the urgent care waiting room, with her left hand wrapped in a paper towel, waiting to be seen by the same kind of doctor she'd been helping keep alive for the past 6 years. The irony wasn't lost on her. It rarely was. She'd driven herself there after the laceration, a medication cart edge, the kind of stupid accident that only happens when you've been running on 4 hours of sleep and someone calls in sick, and the charge nurse just shrugs and says, "We're all stretched thin." She hadn't cried. She'd wrapped it herself, told her supervisor, finished her final 2 med rounds, and then clocked out. That was the kind of person Nora was. The kind who finishes. The grocery store had been a mistake. She knew it even as she pulled into the lot. Her scrubs were rumpled, her dark hair was coming loose from its bun, and she had a coffee stain on her sleeve that she hadn't noticed until she was already under the fluorescent lights. She just needed a few things. Bread, ibuprofen, something she could eat standing over her kitchen sink at 9:30 at night. She wasn't going to be long. The store was quiet the way grocery stores get late on a Tuesday. A few retirees moving slowly through the produce section. A teenage employee listlessly reorganizing a cereal display. Nora grabbed a basket and made her way through the aisles efficiently, the same way she did everything, methodically, without wasting motion. She was in the express lane when it happened. The woman in front of her was somewhere in her late 50s, dressed in the kind of casual expensive that required effort to appear effortless. Ivory linen blazer, tasteful jewelry, highlights that cost more than Nora's car payment. She was purchasing a bottle of wine, a wedge of artisanal cheese, and a small bunch of orchids, and she was talking on her phone the entire time, not making any move to put her items on the belt. Nora waited. She was good at waiting. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes and a name tag that said Joel, stood patiently behind the register. He caught Nora's eye for just a moment and gave the smallest, most exhausted shrug known to retail humanity. The woman finally ended her call, dropped her phone into her bag, and began placing her items on the belt with the deliberate slowness of someone who has never once worried about being in anyone's way. When Joel rang up her total, she frowned at the screen. "That can't be right," she said. The cheese was on sale. Joel checked his screen. "I don't think I'm seeing a sale on that one, ma'am." "Well," the sign said otherwise. She turned and looked back down the aisle, as if expecting the sign to come apologize in person. Her gaze swept past Nora the first time. Then it came back. It stopped there. Nora became aware, suddenly, of exactly what she looked like. The rumpled scrubs, the loose hair, the paper towel still wrapped around her left hand beneath her sleeve, because she hadn't had time to stop at the pharmacy for bandaging. She was tired in the way that shows in a person's face, not just sleepy but hollowed, the kind of tired that takes up residence behind the eyes. The woman's expression shifted. It was subtle, and it was not. "Some people really shouldn't be allowed in places like this," she said. She said it to the air in front of her, but she said it at Nora. Joel's hands went still on the register. Nora said nothing. She was familiar with the calculation, the split second where you decide whether this is worth it, whether you have enough left in you, whether anything you say will matter. She ran the numbers quickly. She had 4 ibuprofen left in her system. Her hand was throbbing. She had to be back in that hospital in 8 hours. She said nothing. The woman paid, took her bag, and walked out. She didn't look back. Joel watched her go, then looked at Nora with an expression she recognized. The particular helpless sympathy of someone who has witnessed something small and ugly and can't do anything about it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It's okay," Nora said, "because that was what you said." It wasn't okay. She knew that. He knew that. They both pretended otherwise because it was 9:30 on a Tuesday, and there was nowhere else for the truth to go. She paid for her things and walked out into the parking lot. The woman was still there. She was standing beside a silver SUV, wrestling with her reusable bags and the orchids, having apparently dropped her keys somewhere in the process. The wine bottle was on the roof of her car. The orchids were listing dangerously. She was muttering something under her breath that didn't sound charitable. Nora almost kept walking. Almost. But there was something in her, some deeply inconvenient part of her that had survived 11 years of Catholic school and 6 years of nursing and had refused, despite all evidence, to become something smaller that made her stop. She set her basket on the ground, crossed the 5 feet of asphalt between them, and picked up the woman's keys. They'd slid under the rear tire. She held them out. The woman stared at her. "Your keys," Nora said simply. The woman took them. She didn't say thank you. She looked at Nora with an expression that was not quite confusion and not quite shame, but somewhere in the uncomfortable territory between, and she got in her car and drove away. Nora picked up her basket and walked to her own car and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment in the dark. She wasn't sure why she was crying. She wasn't sad exactly. She was just full of a long day and an ugly moment and the specific ache of having done the right thing for someone who hadn't earned it, which is the hardest kind of right thing to do. She sat there for maybe 3 minutes. Then she drove home. What Nora did not know, as she drove home through the quiet streets with her grocery bag on the passenger seat and her hand still throbbing faintly, was that a man named Garrett had seen everything. He'd been parked 2 spaces over from the silver SUV. He'd been sitting in a dark green pickup truck with a dog in the back seat, a large, composed Belgian Malinois who had watched the entire exchange in the parking lot with the alert, calm interest that working dogs bring to all human behavior. Garrett had been in that parking lot because his dog, whose name was Rook, needed a specific brand of food that only that particular grocery store carried, and Garrett ran on a schedule, and Tuesday night was when he got groceries. He was not the kind of man who deviated from a schedule without a reason. But he'd sat there for a moment after Nora drove away, and he'd looked at Rook in the rearview mirror, and Rook had looked back at him with that expression working dogs have. The one that seems to say, "Well, what are we doing?" Garrett had sat there a moment longer. Then he'd gone inside and bought the dog food. He saw her again 4 days later. This was not entirely coincidence. He worked at the VA medical center 3 blocks from the urgent care clinic where Nora had been treated, and he took the same route home most evenings, and there was a diner on that route. Merkel's, a narrow, faded place with good coffee and a waitress named Dolores, who had been there since apparently the beginning of time, where he occasionally stopped. Nora was a regular there. He didn't know this yet. She was in the corner booth, still in her scrubs, with a mug of coffee and a paperback book open in front of her, and she was clearly in the middle of that specific kind of decompression that shift workers and soldiers and anyone who has spent the day managing other people's crises learns to do. The deliberate unplugging, the slow re-entry into the world where you are not responsible for anything. Garrett sat at the counter. He ordered coffee. He did not intend to speak to her. But Rook was with him. Rook was almost always with him. And Rook, who had the leash and manners of a dog, who had been very well trained and who therefore made his own decisions about when those manners applied, spotted Nora across the diner and made a quiet, specific sound. Not a bark, just a sound. Nora looked up from her book. She saw the dog first. Most people did. And then she saw Garrett, and something crossed her face that he'd learned to recognize over many years of reading situations quickly. It was the look of someone who has placed a person they can't quite place. "Your dog is very polite," she said, which was not what most people said. "He's working on it," Garrett said. Rook, as if to demonstrate, sat down with great dignity and looked at Nora as though she were an interesting problem he had not yet solved. "What's his name?" "Rook." She reached out her hand, low and open, the way someone does who knows dogs. Rook assessed it, approved, accepted the acknowledgement with the measured grace of a dog who had been patted by generals and was not particularly impressed by any of it. "I've seen you before," she said then. Not accusatory, just honest. Garrett nodded. "Grocery store. 4 days ago." She looked at him steadily. She had the particular kind of directness that people develop when they've spent years in environments where being indirect wastes time. "You saw that," she said. "I did. I didn't realize. You weren't looking." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know what I would have done if she'd seen me pick up her keys. If she'd said something else. What do you think you would have done?" Nora considered this with genuine seriousness. "Probably still handed her the keys," she said finally, "and then maybe cried in my car for 4 minutes instead of 3. Garrett looked at her. It was not a long look, but it was the kind of look that takes a person's full measure. "Garrett Hale," he said. "Nora Vance," she said. "Are you going to sit at the counter the whole time, or are you going to bring the dog over here so I can actually pet him?" Rook, somehow, was already moving. It became a Tuesday thing, then a Thursday thing, then something that didn't have a name yet, but that Dolores, who had seen everything in that diner over the course of 30 years, recognized immediately and said nothing about, because she was wise. Nora learned things about Garrett in the oblique way that people reveal themselves in diners over coffee. Not in declarations, but in the small accumulations of detail. He'd served for 17 years, Army Special Forces, the last several of those years doing work he didn't describe in specifics, but that had left him with a very particular kind of stillness. Not the stillness of a man with nothing going on, the stillness of a man who had learned to make silence into armor. He'd been out for 2 years. He was at the VA now, not as a patient, or not primarily as a patient, but as someone who worked with the K-9 program there, helping match veterans with trained service dogs, doing the kind of work that required understanding both the dogs and the men and the particular language between them. Rook was his own service dog. This surprised Nora more than it should have, she realized, because she had spent 6 years working in a hospital and should have known better than to make assumptions about what need looked like. "What does he do for you?" she asked. She asked it the way she would ask a patient, direct, no hedging, but with the understanding that the question was serious. Garrett looked at Rook, who was sleeping under the booth with his head on Garrett's foot. "He knows," he said. "Before I do, sometimes. He'll put his head in my lap and just..." He stopped. "Tried again. There are times when it's loud inside my head, and he makes it quieter." Nora nodded. She understood loud in unexpected ways. "I had a patient once," she said, "who used to get panicked at night, real bad. We tried everything. Medication, different protocols, CBT exercises with the psych team. Nothing stuck. And then one day his daughter brought her dog in, this ancient fat beagle, and we let it happen, against every regulation. The dog sat on his bed and the man slept through the night for the first time in 3 weeks." She paused. "His daughter cried. I cried. The beagle was completely unbothered." Garrett smiled at that. It was a good smile, slow, like it hadn't been used recently and needed a moment to warm up. "You let it happen," he said. "Sometimes the right thing and the regulation aren't the same thing," she said. "You learn that fast, in nursing. You learn it in other places too," he said. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, a light rain had started. Merkel's was warm and smelled like coffee, and the particular kind of pie that only exists in diners, run by people who learned to bake from someone who really meant it. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said. "Yeah." "Why did you stay in the parking lot after she left? You sat there." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Rook shifted slightly in his sleep and settled again. "I don't know exactly," Garrett said. "I guess I wanted to see what you would do and you surprised me," he said. "Most people in that situation, they drive home angry, which is fair. Or they convince themselves it wasn't as bad as it felt, which is also fair. Or they go back inside and report it to the manager, which feels good for about 10 minutes. He looked at her. "You went back to her. You picked up her keys. You handed them to her and you didn't say a word." "That could have just been conditioning," Nora said. 6 years of being told that the patient's family comes first, no matter how they treat you. "It wasn't conditioning," Garrett said. She didn't argue. She knew it wasn't either. 3 weeks later, on a Friday evening, Nora was finishing a 12-hour shift when she was called to a room on the 4th floor. An elderly man, a veteran, it turned out, a Korean war vet named Mr. Ambrose, who was 91 years old and sharp as a blade, had been asking to see someone. He'd been in the hospital for 6 days with a hip fracture, and he was not a man who complained, but something was wrong. Nora went to his room. He was sitting up in bed, which he shouldn't have been doing without assistance, and he looked at her when she came in with eyes that were fierce and clear and tired. "They took my dog," he said. "I'm sorry, my dog. His name is Bishop, German Shepherd, 8 years old, been with me for 7 of them." His voice was steady, but the thing under it was not. "They took him to a shelter. My niece lives 2 states away. She couldn't come in time, and animal control. They came and they took him." Nora sat down. She didn't pull up a chair from across the room. She sat on the edge of his bed the way nurses aren't supposed to do, and she said, "Tell me about Bishop," he told her. It took a while. Bishop had been given to him through a veteran support program after his wife died. Bishop slept at the foot of his bed. Bishop could tell when his blood pressure was spiking before the monitor could. Bishop knew, somehow, when the dreams were coming and would put his head against his chest like a warm, anchoring weight. "I'm not worried about me," Mr. Ambrose said. "I've been uncomfortable before. I can manage uncomfortable. But he won't understand where I went. He'll think I left him." The thing under his voice surfaced then, briefly, and went back under. Nora sat with him for a moment. Then she took out her phone. She called Garrett. She told him the situation in under a minute. She'd gotten efficient with this particular kind of briefing over years of handoffs and crisis calls. When she finished, there was a brief silence. "What shelter?" Garrett said. She found out. She told him, "Give me 2 hours," he said. It took him 90 minutes. Nora was still in the building when her phone buzzed. A photo. Garrett, standing outside the hospital staff entrance, with a German shepherd sitting at his heel. Bishop was large and golden brown and had the look of a dog who had been very worried and had just now stopped. She went down to get them. She brought them up the back way, through the service corridor, which was irregular, and through the stairwell on the east side of the building, which was technically not for patient use, but which nobody monitored after 7 p.m., which she knew because she had been working this building for 6 years and knew every corner of it the way a person knows a house they've lived in. When she opened the door to Mr. Ambrose's room, the old man looked up. Bishop saw him from the doorway and made a sound, not a bark, something lower than that, something that sounded almost human in its relief, and crossed the room in 3 strides and put his head in the old man's lap. Mr. Ambrose put both hands on the dog's head. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Nora looked at Garrett, who was standing in the doorway beside her, and Garrett looked at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything either. Rook, sitting at Garrett's heel, watched Bishop with the calm recognition of one working dog acknowledging another, a kind of nod between professionals. "You're going to get in trouble for this," Garrett said quietly. "Maybe," Nora said. "You did it anyway. Someone had to." He looked at her a long moment. In the room, Mr. Ambrose was talking to Bishop now, quietly, the way you talk to something you love when you thought you'd lost it. "You know," Garrett said, "I told you surprised me. In the parking lot. I remember. You keep doing that," he said. She looked up at him. He was looking at her in that measuring way, but there was something different in it now. Not the careful assessment of a man deciding whether to trust a stranger, but the particular quality of attention a person gives something they've decided matters. "I need to chart this visit as a therapy animal evaluation," she said, "which is not technically inaccurate. So if anyone asks you, Rook was here for a patient consult. That's not what happened." "I know what happened," she said. "I was there." The corner of his mouth moved. "Garrett Hale," she said, "are you smiling?" "Working on it," he said. "The woman from the grocery store, the one with the silver SUV and the ivory blazer and the orchids, came into the hospital 6 days later." Nora didn't recognize her at first. She looked different without the armor of her evening and the wine and the context. She looked smaller. She was there for her husband, who had been admitted that morning for a cardiac event, and she was frightened in the particular way that money and composure can't fully hide, because fear gets underneath all of that when it really means to. Nora was the nurse assigned to her husband's room. She didn't say anything about the grocery store. She didn't think about the grocery store, or not much. What she thought about was that there was a frightened woman in a hallway and a man in a bed beyond a glass door who needed watching, and that was her job, and she was good at it. She walked the woman through everything, her husband's status, the monitoring they were doing, what to expect in the next 24 hours, calmly and without condescension, and with the particular careful kindness that is a skill in itself, distinct from feeling kind, practiced and refined and real. The woman listened. At the end, she was quiet for a moment. "You're very good at this," she said finally. "Thank you," Nora said. There was a pause. The woman looked at her, really looked, in the way that people look when they're trying to work something out. "Have we met?" she said. Nora considered her. She thought about the parking lot and the 3 minutes in her car and Garrett in his green truck and Rook watching from the back seat with his clear, serious eyes. "I don't think so," she said. She went back to her charts. Garrett was waiting outside when she finished her shift. This had become a thing, not every night, but often enough. He was sitting on the low wall by the ambulance bay with Rook beside him and 2 coffees and a carrier, which was the kind of gesture that doesn't require a name yet. "Hard shift," he said. "Medium," she said. She sat down beside him and took the coffee. "Do you know what the most underrated skill in nursing is?" "Tell me." "Knowing when someone is scared and treating them like they're not," she said. "Not ignoring it, not calling attention to it, just meeting them at the level they can handle and helping them up from there." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Rook put his head on her knee, which he'd started doing recently, and which Garrett had made no comment about. "That's not just nursing," Garrett said. "I know," she said. They sat together on the wall, 2 coffees between them and the dog leaning against her leg, and the night coming down soft over the city, and for a little while everything that had been loud went quiet. That was the thing about Nora Vance that the woman in the grocery store had not understood, that the people who spend themselves most fully in the service of others are not the ones who have the least. They are the ones who have learned, somehow, to replenish, to sit on a wall in the dark with someone who doesn't need anything from them and let that be enough. She was 31 years old, and she had been running on empty for a long time. But she was not empty. She never had been. And on a Tuesday night in a grocery store parking lot, a man and his dog had been paying attention, and now here they were, the 3 of them, and the night was quiet, and the coffee was warm, and Rook was asleep against her leg. And somewhere upstairs an old man was sleeping in a hospital bed with his dog at his feet. That was enough. For now it was more than enough.